Happy Tuesday, guys. I hope you guys are having a good day. We are going to start with chapter 13 today, and this is where we're picking up with Edward being found by a dog, Lucy, and being taken to his hobo friend, Edward, and they have set off on the road. And here's a picture of Edward and Bull. They traveled on foot. They traveled in empty rail cars. They were always on the move. But in truth, said Bull, we are going nowhere. That, my friend, is the irony of our constant movement. Edward rode on Bull's bedroll, slung over Bull's shoulder, with only his head and ears sticking out. Bull was always careful to position the rabbit so he was not looking down or up, but was instead forever looking behind him at the road as they traveled. At night, they slept on the ground under the stars. Lucy, after her initial disappointment about Edward, became unfit for consumption, took a liking to him, and slept curled up beside him. Sometimes she even rested her muzzle on his china stomach, and the noises she made in her sleep, whimpering and growling and shuffling, and resonated inside Edward's body. To his surprise, he began to feel a deep tenderness for the dog. During the night while Bull and Lucy slept, Edward with his eyes open, stared up at the constellations. He said their names, and then he said the names of the people who loved him. He started with Abilene, and then went to Nellie and Lawrence, and from there to Bull and Lucy, and then he ended again with Abilene. Abilene, Nellie, Lawrence, Bull, Lucy, Abilene. See, Edward told Pellegrina, I'm not like the princess. I know what love is. There were times, too, when Bull and Lucy gathered around the campfire with the other tramps. Bull was a good storyteller and an even better singer. Here's a picture of them around the campfire. Sing for us, Bull, the men shouted. Bull sat with Lucy leaning against his leg, and Edward balanced on his right knee and sang from somewhere deep inside of him. Just as Edward could feel Lucy's whimpers and growls resonate through his body at night, he could also feel the deep, sad sound of Bull's songs move through him. Edward loved it, and when Bull sang. And he was grateful to Bull, too, for sensing that the dress was not the kind of clothing for Edward. Malone, Bull said one night, it's not my desire to offend you or comment negatively on your choice of garb, but I'm forced to tell you that you stick out like a sore thumb in that princess dress. And also, no wish to offend you, but the dress has seen better days. Nellie's beautiful dress was not fared well at the dump in its subsequent ramblings with Bull and Lucy. It was so torn and dirty and full of holes that it barely resembled a dress anymore. I have a solution. I hope it meets with your approval. He took his own knit stocking cap and cut a big hole in the top of it, 2 small armholes on the side, and then took off Edward's dress. Look away, Lucy. Let's not embarrass Malone by staring at his nakedness. Bull slid the hat over Edward's head and pulled down and poked his arms through the smaller holes. There you go. Now you just need some pants. The pants Bull made him, cutting up several red handkerchiefs and sewing them together so that they formed a makeshift covering for Edward's legs. Now you have the proper outlook law, said Bull, standing back and admiring his work. Now you look like a rabbit on the run. You can see a picture. He made him a shirt, and he made him some pants. Chapter 14. At first, the others thought of Edward was a great joke. A rabbit, the hobo said, laughing. Let's chop him up and put him in some stew. Or when Bull sat with Edward, carefully balanced on his knee, and one of them would call out, Got yourself a baby dolly, Bull? Edward, of course, felt a surge of anger at being referred to as a dolly, but Bull never got angry. He simply sat with Edward on his knee and said nothing. Soon the men became accustomed to Edward, and word of his existence spread. So it was that when Bull and Lucy stepped through the campfire in another town, another state, another place entirely, the men knew Edward and were glad to see him. Malone! They shouted in unison. Edward felt a warm rush of pleasure at being recognized, at being known. Whatever it was that began in Nellie's kitchen, Edward's new and strange ability to sit very still and concentrate on his being of the stories of another became invaluable around the hobo campfire. Look at Malone, said a man named Jack one evening. He's listening to every word. Certainly, said Bull. Of course he is. Later that night, Jack came and sat next to Bull and asked if he could borrow the rabbit. Bull handed Edward over, and Jack sat with Edward upon his knee. He whispered into Edward's ear. Helen, and Jack Jr., and Taffy. She's the baby. Those are my kids' names. They're all in North Carolina. You ever been to North Carolina? It's a pretty state. That's where they are. Helen, Jack Jr., Taffy. You remember those names, Malone, okay? After this, whenever Bull, Lucy, and Edward went, some hobo would take Edward aside and whisper names of his children in Edward's ear. Betty, Ted, Nancy, Jimmy, William, Eileen, Skipper, Faith. Edward knew what it was like to say over and over the names of those you left behind. He knew what it was like to miss someone, and so he listened, and in his listening his heart opened wide and wider still. The rabbit stayed lost with Lucy and Bull for a long time. Almost 7 years passed, and in that time Edward became an excellent hobo. Happy to be on the road, restless when he was still. The sound of the wheels on the train tracks became a music that soothed him. He could be riding on the rails forever. But one night in a railroad yard in Memphis, as Bull and Lucy slept in the empty freight car, Edward kept watch. Trouble arrived. A man entered the freight car and shone a light on Bull's face and kicked him awake. "You bum," he said. "You dirty bum. I'm sick of you guys everywhere. This ain't no motel." Bull sat up slowly. Lucy started to bark. "Shut up," said the man. He delivered a swift kick to Lucy's side and made her yelp in surprise. All of his life, Edward had known what he was, a rabbit made of china, a rabbit with bendable arms and legs and ears. He was bendable, though, only if his was in the hands of another. He could not move himself. He had never regretted this more deeply than that night when he and Bull and Lucy were discovered in the empty rail car. Edward wanted to be able to defend Lucy, but he couldn't do nothing. He could only lie there and wait. "Say something," said the man to Bull. Bull put his hands in the air. "We're lost." "Lost? Ha! I bet you're lost." And then the man said, "What's this?" shining the light on Edward. "That's Malone," said Bull. "What?" said the man. He poked at Edward with a toe of his boot. "Things are out of control. Things are out of hand. Not on my watch. No, sir. Not when I'm in charge." The train suddenly lurched into motion. "No, sir," said the man again. He looked down at Edward. "No free rides for rabbits." He turned and flung open the door and the rail car, and then he turned back, and with one swift kick, he sent Edward sailing into the darkness. The rabbit flew through the air, and far behind him he heard Lucy's anguished howl. "Ow!" she cried. Edward landed with the most alarming thump, and then he tumbled and tumbled and tumbled down the dirty hill, where he finally stopped moving. He was on his back, staring up at the night sky. The world was silent. He could not hear Lucy. He could not hear the train. Edward looked up at the stars. He started to say the names of the constellations, but then he stopped. "Bull," he said. "Lucy." How many times Edward wondered what he would leave without getting the chance to say goodbye. A lone cricket started to sing. Edward listened. Something deep inside of him ached. He wished that he could cry. And that takes us to chapter 15, which we'll read one more. Chapter 15. In the morning, the sun rose, and the cricket song gave way to a bird song, and an old woman came walking down the dirt road and tripped right over Edward. She said, and pushed Edward with a fishing pole. "Looks like a rabbit," she said. She put down her basket and bent and stared at Edward. "Only he ain't real." She stood up. She said again, rubbing her back. "What I say is, there's a use for everything, and everything is a use. That's what I say." Edward didn't care what she said. The terrible ache he had felt the night before had gone away, and he had been replaced with a different feeling, one of hollowness and despair. "Pick me up or don't pick me up," the rabbit thought. "It makes no difference to me." The old lady picked him up. She bent him double and put him in her basket, which smelled of weeds and fish, and then she went walking, swinging the basket and singing, "Nobody knows the troubles I've seen." Edward, in spite of himself, listened. "I've seen troubles too," he thought. "You bet I have, and apparently they aren't over yet." Edward was right. His troubles weren't over. The old woman found a use for him. She hung him on a pole with her vegetable garden. She nailed his velvet ears to the wooden pole and spread his arms out as if he was flying, and attached his paws to the pole by wrapping pieces of wire around him. In addition to Edward, pie tins hung from the pole. They clinked and clanked and shone in the sun. "Ain't a doubt in my mind that you can scare 'em off," said the old lady. "Scare who off?" thought Edward. Birds, he soon discovered. Crows. They came flying at him, cawing and screeching and wheeling over his head, diving at his ears. "Come on, Clyde," said the woman. She clapped her hands. "You get on and act ferocious." Clyde? Edward felt a weirdness and tense wash over him, and he thought he might actually be able to sigh aloud. Would the world ever tire of calling him by the wrong names? The old woman clapped her hands again. "Get to work, Clyde. Scare them birds off." And then she walked away out of the garden and toward her small house. The birds were insistent. They flew around his head. They tugged at the loose threads on his sweater. One large crow in particular would not leave the rabbit alone. He perched on the pole and screamed a dark message in Edward's left ear. "Caw, caw, caw," without ceasing. As the sun rose higher and shone meaner and brighter, Edward came somewhat dazed. He mistook the large crow for Pellegrina. "Go ahead," he thought. "Turn me into a warthog if you want. I don't care. I'm done with caring." "Caw, caw," said the Pellegrina crow. And finally the sun set and the birds flew away. Edward hung by his velvet ears and looked up at the night sky. He saw the stars. But for the first time in his life, he looked at them and felt no comfort. Instead, he felt mocked. "You're down there alone," the stars seemed to say to him, "and we're up here in our constellations together." "I have been loved," Edward told the stars. "So," said the stars, "what difference does that make when you're all alone now?" Edward could think of no answer to that question. Eventually the stars lightened and the sky lightened and the stars disappeared one by one. The birds remained and the old woman came back to the garden, and she brought a boy with her. So here is Edward, who's now watching over a garden to keep the crows out. And that takes us to chapter 16, which we will read tomorrow. Have a good Tuesday. Bye.